Transmigrated as the villainous supporting character in a story where everyone dotes on the female lead. I locked my childhood sweetheart and the male lead in a dark room, and gave them both potent aphrodisiacs, intending to make my escape after causing chaos. As I reached the door, I discovered someone had locked it from the outside. I quickly pulled out my mobile to call for help, only to remember there was no signal in the basement. I turned stiffly, looking at the two men I had chained to iron chairs on opposite sides of the room. The male lead glared at me coldly. "You drugged us and now you're trying to run? Come here." My childhood sweetheart also fixed me with an icy stare. "Isn't this what you wanted? Come get it." The awkward part was that in another half hour, the locks on their restraints would automatically release. I stammered nervously, "Why don't you wait a bit longer? Noella will be here soon." Later, after being tormented mercilessly, I passed out, only to regain consciousness. The scene before me was terrifying. First the male lead, then my childhood sweetheart. Ding! This novel reminds you to click the subscribe button in the bottom right corner to read the complete novel. Finally, I managed to secure my childhood friend to the iron chair while he was unconscious. I let out a long sigh of relief. I turned to look at the male lead, who I had locked on the other side. Even in his sleep, his brows were furrowed. Not long after, Calvin Stewart came to his senses. He was drenched in sweat. Realizing his body was restrained, he looked down and his face turned ghastly pale. "Kyra Murphy, what have you done to me?" I lifted his shirt with my finger. The man's muscular chest heaved violently, below which were perfectly shaped six-pack abs. Beads of sweat rolled down his sexy V-line. The drug was taking effect. A flash of anger crossed Calvin's eyes, along with a deeply suppressed hint of shame. "Your body is so nice, I like it very much," I said cheerfully. To provoke him further, I bent down and licked his chest. A bit salty." My childhood friend's abdomen contracted as if in spasm. He snapped, "Kyra." Ignoring him, I placed my hand on his thigh, gradually approaching his lips. Calvin's throat bobbed. He glared at me, his crimson lips seemed to be both warning and inviting. Just as our lips were about to touch, I stopped and said with a smile, "If I touch you, Noella won't like you anymore." Hearing this name, Calvin's eyes, which had been filled with desire, suddenly cleared. He spoke with disgust. "Kyra, do you think you can change anything with such despicable methods?" His tone grew increasingly cold. "It only makes me despise you more." I had heard similar words countless times before, but it still stung my heart a little. Calvin was the first person to show me kindness after I entered this world. Though the system kept reminding me that my character was supposed to be a spoiled and domineering young lady, urging me to act haughty to highlight the female lead's gentleness and kindness. I couldn't shake off the meekness and timidity ingrained in me from my previous life as a fake heiress. I always found myself unconsciously trying to please those around me, wanting them to like me, to accept me. When Mrs. Nicholson's dog was swept away by the current, I jumped into the river without hesitation to rescue it as she cried in distress. When Butler Bennett's daughter accidentally broke an antique vase and trembled in fear of punishment, I took the blame upon myself. But even after all that, I still overheard them gossiping behind my back, claiming I had a vicious nature. They said I deliberately threw Mrs. Nicholson's dog into the river and framed Butler Bennett's daughter for breaking the vase, all to gain leverage over them. The system sighed in my ear. "You see? A vicious supporting character is just that. No matter what you do, you can't change it." My face turned pale, my heart feeling as if it had plummeted into an abyss. That's when Calvin Stewart appeared. He sternly rebuked them. "Ungrateful wretches, despicable lowlifes," those were the words he used to describe the three of them. Later, my father dismissed them from their positions. Calvin gently patted my head, his gaze soft and warm. At that moment, a surge of warmth flooded my long lonely heart. It turned out there was someone who could see the good in me. But when did it change? When did those words like despicable lowlife start being used on me instead? I suppose it began the day Noella Harvey transferred to our class. She was the female lead of this world, poor but resilient. At first, Calvin didn't like her, finding her unsophisticated and dim-witted. I saw my former self in her, and to avoid criticism from the system, I haughtily tossed my meal card at her, ordering her to get my food. After taking a single bite, I complained about the taste and pushed it towards her, choosing to nibble on the bread I'd brought from home instead. Seeing her hands red and chapped from the winter cold, I impatiently threw gloves and ointment at her, telling her to heal quickly so she wouldn't stain my homework with blood. Noella studied diligently but struggled to grasp the material, consistently ranking at the bottom of the class. Unable to bear it any longer, I tossed a language learning device onto her desk, coldly mocking, "Study hard. Your pronunciation is painful to listen to." Noella awkwardly thanked me, but Calvin furrowed his brow. He picked up the device and slammed it down on my desk, saying, "She has me to teach her. She doesn't need your charity." I was stunned for a moment before looking up. From that day on, the person I thought was the only one who understood me gradually began to interpret all my actions as harassment and jealousy towards Noella, just like Mrs. Nicholson and Butler Bennett had. He once told me bluntly, "Don't think you can use our so-called engagement to blackmail me. It was just a casual verbal agreement between our parents, it doesn't mean anything." I mumbled, "Then why did you kiss me last night?" Calvin's face reddened slightly, but he gritted his teeth and said, "I was drunk. I mistook you for Noella." Faced with the system's cautious consolation, I remained silent for a long while before smiling and saying, "It's all right. After all, I'm supposed to be the vicious supporting character. This is for the best. The sooner I complete my task, the sooner I can collect my reward and return home to start my new life. The system has promised to create a new identity for me in the original world." Thinking about the massive bonus I was about to receive, my previously gloomy mood lifted. As I turned my head, I realized the male lead had woken up at some point. His cold eyes fixed on me, sending chills down my spine. Unlike Calvin, Luther Farley was a man of unfathomable depths and far more ruthless methods. 10 years ago, when Luther was 14, my parents brought him to me, asking us to get along well. He was the illegitimate son of the Farley family, only sent to live with my family because his stepmother couldn't bear the sight of him, and his birth father found him an embarrassment. As the cruel antagonist, I naturally looked down on him, making him carry my shoes and bags, give me leg massages, treating him like a servant. Luther had a phobia of being touched, hating when others made contact with him. I deliberately made him apply sunscreen to my body. On the beach, the young man's dry, warm hands caressed my soft back, pausing for a long moment before slowly moving downward. Impatiently, I instructed, "Don't forget my thighs. Hurry up, I want to go for a swim." Luther's voice was hoarse, clearly struggling to control himself. "All right." Though he agreed, his movements became increasingly slow. Annoyed, I turned over, accidentally knocking my knee against his forehead. My pale thigh brushed against his face and lips. Luther kept his head down, the veins in his neck slightly bulging. His fists clenched as he seemed lost in thought. Seeing his humiliated expression, I let out a small snort without apologizing, pushing him aside as I walked towards Calvin, who was already in the sea. As fellow outcasts in our families, I sometimes felt sorry for Luther's situation, especially after seeing the scars on his body left by his severely depressed mother. When he first appeared before me at 14, he was tall but painfully thin, his eyes filled with a pale numbness. Upper-class families despise illegitimate children the most. My parents treated him as if he were invisible, and even the servants looked down on him. Often, while I had lavish meals, he was only given plain rice and vegetables. I would order him to finish the leftover meat dishes after I had barely touched my food. At night, I'd force him to drink the milk I didn't want. He loved the piano, even though his mother had repeatedly crushed his fingers under her feet in fits of hysteria. I hired the best tutors to teach him, using the excuse that I needed live piano music to fall asleep, and ordered him to master Für Elise within 10 days. Luther was a genius. He learned faster than I had imagined. The piano became his best way to soothe his emotions. And finally, a glimmer of light appeared in the eyes of that gloomy young man. After being bullied by me for a full decade, it's no wonder Luther completely fell for the angelic female lead when she appeared. And for her sake, he became even more ruthless in his revenge against me. I sauntered over, teasingly lifting his chin. The man's features were sharp and defined, his physique tall and imposing, with an air of authority. There was no trace left of his former thin and weak self. It seems I've raised him quite well. Satisfied, I planted a kiss on his cheek. Luther froze, a blush rapidly spreading across his neck and the tips of his ears. Kyra! Calvin practically growled my name. Ignoring him, I leaned down to address the impeccably dressed man. Luther, don't you find me utterly detestable as well? I reached out, undoing his buttons one by one until his shirt fell open, revealing a beautifully sculpted torso. Luther stared at me intently, lips pressed together, saying nothing. My fingers traced down from his prominent Adam's apple, across his collarbone, chest, and taut abs. How peculiar here I was, fondling Luther, yet Calvin was the one getting all worked up. As if he was the one being assaulted. Kyra Murphy. Get over here. Where do you think you're touching him? Have you no shame? With a click, I undid Luther's belt buckle. The man's entire body tensed, even trembling slightly. He'll probably need to shower 8 times after this, I thought gleefully. Just how severe was Luther's obsession with cleanliness? In the original story, aside from Noella, no one was allowed to touch his body, not even a simple handshake. I pulled out his belt and looped it around his neck, then settled myself onto his lap. Perhaps due to the drug's effects, his body was alarmingly hot, his heartbeat unusually rapid. Luther, the woman you despise most is now straddling you, I said, wrapping my arms around his neck and tilting my chin haughtily. How does it feel? Agonizing, isn't it? Luther let out a deep and replied, very agonizing. I let out a smug hum. Calvin was beside himself. Kyra, sitting on a man like that, have you no sense of decency? Automatically tuning out his tirade, I continued tormenting Luther. Call me master, or I'll take your trousers off too, I threatened. Luther's eyes grew misty, yet he didn't seem angry. On the contrary, he appeared somewhat pleased. He gazed at me, his tone deepening, as you wish, master. But must we do this here? I was taken aback. I mentally queried the system. What does he mean? The system pondered for a few seconds. Perhaps it's a delaying tactic, trying to get you to release him. I won't fall for that. Yes, I'm going to have my way with you right here, I declared petulantly. Calvin hurled another insult that I didn't quite catch. The female antagonist in the original story became increasingly dim-witted towards the end, even concocting a plan to kidnap both men, dose them with potent aphrodisiacs, and have the female lead catch them in compromising positions, all for the sake of revenge. Feeling his heat, I uncomfortably shifted backwards, only to hear Luther's breathing grow heavier, his gaze on me intensifying. Realizing what that meant, I scrambled off his lap in a panic. To maintain my character, I took off my high heels and pressed my bare foot against his abdomen, grinding down hard. As expected of a low-born bastard. How filthy! Luther let out a muffled groan, lowering his head to stare at my delicate foot. His ears reddened and his throat bobbed repeatedly. Frightened, I quickly withdrew my foot. System, something seems off here, doesn't it? The system also grew tense. Forget about them, the plot is nearly complete anyway. Let's get out of here. I nodded and quickly walked towards the iron door, ready to leave. According to the original plot, the male lead and the second male lead were supposed to suffer in the basement for 2 hours. When the drug's effects were at their peak, the female lead would appear. Meanwhile, the supporting female character would get into a car accident and fall into a coma while out buying condoms. The system had promised me that after completing this plot, I could return to my original world without experiencing the torment that followed. I pushed the door. It wouldn't open. I tried a few more times, but it still wouldn't budge. My heart sank. Someone had locked the door from the outside. Cold sweat broke out on my forehead. What should I do now? The system told me not to panic and that it would think of a solution. After that, I couldn't contact it anymore. I cursed the useless ally a few times, then turned around trembling to face the 2 men who were at loggerheads. Both had dark expressions, their eyes filled with a fierce intensity as they looked at me. Luther said coldly, after drugging us, "Where did you think you could run? Calvin also sneered, "Isn't this what you wanted? Come here, I'll give it to you." I shivered in fear. In another half hour, the locks on them would automatically open. This was a program I had set up on the computer in advance, and there was no way to change it directly. Damn, would they beat me up once they were free? I quickly pulled out my phone to call for help, only to find there was no signal in the basement. I paced around anxiously, looking for any means of escape. After searching everywhere, I couldn't even find a dog hole. I looked awkwardly at the two men. "Why don't you wait a bit longer? Noella will be here soon." The system kindly reminded me, "Host, the female lead won't appear for another 2 hours." I replied, "So where were you just now?" The system played dead again. Under my wide-eyed gaze, Luther released the mechanisms on his arms and legs and stood up. I backed away, pressing myself against the door panel, pointing at him tremblingly. How did you?" Luther's expression remained calm. He even meticulously adjusted his sleeves before taking large strides towards me. The calmer he was, the more my legs shook. I frantically called out to the system in my mind. "How did he get up? Bloody hell! Will he hit me?" The system was also panicking. "He shouldn't. The male lead doesn't hit women." Calvin's handsome face turned ashen. "Luther Farley. What did you do? 3 steps. 4 steps. 5 steps." Luther trapped me in his shadow. His muscles were taut, his body drenched in sweat, his eyes dark and intense. What are you going to do?" I tried to appear calm, lifting my chin to glare at him, but my trembling voice betrayed my nervousness. I am not afraid of you." He moved. He raised his hand, and I instinctively closed my eyes and shrank back. But Luther merely gripped my waist, lifted me up, and slung me over his shoulder. He carried me to the iron chair, set me down, and then leaned over me. He trapped me between himself and the iron chair, cutting off all my escape routes. My hands pressed against the man's chest, feeling the defined muscles and scorching heat. And his heart was beating almost frantically. Luther leaned in close to my lips, but then paused. His pupils revealed restraint and self-control as he asked, "Miss, may I kiss you?" Miss was his usual way of addressing me. Just like the other servants. But from his lips, it sounded as sweet as a lover's whisper. I blushed, still haughtily refusing, "No." Luther barely turned his head away. From my angle, I could see the slight tension at the corner of his mouth. This was an expression he only showed when angry or upset. He obediently didn't kiss me, instead moving to kiss my neck and collarbone. In my agitation, I pushed against him, but he easily pinned my wrists. "What are you doing?" "Doing what you originally intended to do." Luther's eyes were tinged with red, but his tone was terrifyingly calm. "But now, it can only be done with me." I was stunned, unable to speak. Across from us, Calvin's eyes bulged with rage. "Luther Farley, have you gone mad? Who gave you permission to touch her?" Luther took off his shirt and threw it over Calvin's head, covering his face, then continued to lean down and kiss my shoulders and collarbone. His breath was hot, and his body temperature alarmingly high. I began to worry if I had given them too much of the drug. Each of Luther's kisses was filled with reverence. The temperature in his mouth was very high, making me tremble slightly. I couldn't help but ask the system in my mind. Something's not right. Did I accidentally ingest the drug too? The temperature gradually rose, and the system blushed, no longer speaking. Wait. Is this right? What would Noella think when she comes in and sees this scene? Wouldn't she faint? I tried to persuade him. Are you sure you don't want to wait a bit longer? Noella really will be here soon. The answer I received was the sound of my dress tearing. The more I mentioned her name, the more ferocious Luther's actions became. I didn't dare mention it again, and could only whimper, unable to make any other sound. Calvin's temple throbbed with a protruding vein as he struggled to get up. The iron chair creaked and shook, but it couldn't hide his reaction. I knew very well that the thin white shirt couldn't conceal. He could still see our entangled figures through the flimsy fabric. Calvin's voice grew lower and lower, until finally, I thought I heard a sob. The drug was too strong. I blacked out several times, but each time I woke, Luther was still continuing. I cried for a long time. Damn, is this what it means to reap what you sow? It's all because of the system's terrible idea. I felt a gentle kiss on my forehead. I'm sorry, but from now on, I don't want to hold back anymore. What does that mean? Is he going to start taking revenge on me? Remembering the tragic experiences of the original character, I felt a wave of despair. Just then, the heavy iron door opened from the outside, and Noella Harvey appeared in the doorway. When she saw the scene in the basement, her face first turned deathly pale, then flushed red. After giving me a pitying look, she glared fiercely at the two men. As for me, I finally couldn't hold on any longer and passed out completely. I had a nightmare. In a claustrophobic basement, I was completely undressed, my face flushed red. First, it was Luther, then Calvin. Later, both of them, one in front and one behind. When I woke up, I found myself lying on a silk bed, drenched in cold sweat, every muscle in my body aching. Beside me sat Noella, her face filled with concern. I secretly breathed a sigh of relief. Thank goodness it was just a dream, utterly terrifying. Then I looked at Noella curiously. Why are you here? According to the plot, shouldn't I have returned to my original world with a fortune by now? Wait a minute. I looked around, realizing this wasn't my room in the original world. I panicked instantly. This isn't right. Why am I not dead yet? Noella's face flashed with bewilderment. She stroked my face tenderly, then a surge of anger welled up in her. She stormed out of the room, and I could faintly hear her arguing with Luther in the hallway. She is such a proud person. How is what you've done to her any different from killing her? Luther Farley, you ungrateful bastard. Are you satisfied now? She doesn't want to live anymore. Noella unleashed a barrage of accusations, but Luther remained silent throughout. A few minutes later, he entered the room alone, his expression dark and unreadable. Catching sight of the bite mark on his neck and the scratch marks on his collarbone, I blushed. To hide my embarrassment, I gritted my teeth and demanded, "Did you tamper with the mechanism? You were never really locked up, were you?" Luther looked at me and nodded. "And you knew about the drugging all along?" "Yes." Furious and ashamed, I turned my back on him, silently asking the system, "What should I do? Is it too late for me to die now?" The system replied, "It's still possible, host." Luther walked to the bedside, tucked me in, and gazed at me silently for a long time. He didn't move or make a sound. Just when I thought he had left, he climbed onto the bed and embraced me from behind. His voice was hoarse. "I know I'm not the one you want, but I can't stand by and watch you with other men." His voice grew deeper. "Even if you hate me, it doesn't matter." Actually, I don't want Calvin that much either." I froze, feeling that this turn of events wasn't quite right. The male lead had indeed gone dark, but the manner of his darkness seemed a bit off. His revenge wasn't quite what I had in mind. The system suggested, "Host, why don't you try to increase the male lead's hatred value before you die?" I guess that's all I can do. For the next period of time, Luther came to see me every day, bringing my favorite foods, or a bouquet of flowers, or a gift, but none of these could earn him a kind look from me. He was now the head of the Farley family, managing the vast Farley group. He was no longer the illegitimate son who was scorned by everyone. Yet he still let me boss him around like before. When I threw tantrums and smashed bowls and plates, he quietly cleaned up the mess. When I haughtily demanded he massage my shoulders and legs, he obediently complied. Although he remained expressionless on the surface, I was convinced that he must be seething with hatred for me inside. Why else would he stay up late at night, standing by my bed and staring at me so eerily? After happily increasing his hatred value for a few days, I decided it was time to get down to business. With such intense surveillance every day, seeking death had become a difficult task. There was no other choice but to slit my wrists. I filled the bathtub with warm water and soaked comfortably for half an hour. Just as I picked up the knife, there was a gentle knock on the door. "Miss?" It was Luther. I ignored him, preparing to continue with the knife. After a few seconds, he spoke again. "Kyra? What are you doing in there?" I looked at the knife in my hand. It seemed I wouldn't be able to die today either. I walked out wrapped in a towel, my body still damp, and shot Luther a cold glance. Who gave you permission to enter my room without knocking? Luther's gaze swept over my pink shoulders. Then he restrained himself and looked away, muttering an apology. That night, Luther stood silently by my bed again. I couldn't help but mutter to the system. This is creepy. Do you think he's sleepwalking? The system was equally puzzled. Surely not. There was no mention of the male lead having a sleepwalking condition. Luther slowly bent down, gently brushing the hair from my face. My heart tightened. Was it finally starting? Was he going to stab me? The man's scent drew closer. Just as I was about to furrow my brow in anticipation, a soft touch pressed against my lips. It was brief, leaving a lingering desire for more. I opened my eyes wide, feeling as if the sky had fallen. Realizing I was awake, Luther stepped back, a flash of panic crossing his face. I turned on the light, illuminating the room. We stared at each other, the atmosphere both ambiguous and delicate. Gritting my teeth, I pretended to be indignant and slapped him across the face. Who gave you permission to steal a kiss from me? Luther's head turned from the force of the slap. And he stood there stunned, speechless for a long time. I couldn't help feeling a bit guilty. I couldn't resist asking the system, did I slap him too hard? The system waved it off. It's fine, this is exactly the effect we wanted. I stretched my foot out in front of him, snorted, and deliberately said something even more malicious. If you like kissing so much, why don't you kiss my foot? Luther raised his head, his eyes filled with restraint and hurt. And perhaps deeper down, a hint of resentment. He cradled my foot, my 5 evenly shaped toes gleaming pink and delicate. The skin smooth and fair, with light pink nail polish on the nails. Luther's ears turned red, his heavy breathing fanning across the top of my foot. He looked as if he was about to lower his head and kiss it. Frightened, I quickly pulled my foot back under my skirt. He was really going to kiss it? I'm not sure if it was my imagination, but there seemed to be a hint of disappointment in Luther's eyes. Perhaps sensing my low spirits, Luther began to allow Noella to visit me. She accompanied me every day, tending to flowers, playing the piano, swimming, painting, doing everything she could to cheer me up. Noella was still that vibrant ray of sunshine from the original story, radiating kindness towards me even though I had once hurt her. I secretly attempted hanging myself, drowning, and jumping out of windows. But she always discovered and rescued me just in time. Eventually, Noella wouldn't dare leave my side for even a moment, anxiously guarding the bathroom door when I used it. Faced with her reddened eyes, I felt a pang of guilt. But I was determined to return home. This world didn't belong to me, and I wasn't the spoiled, willful Kyra Murphy who was showered with adoration. One day, Calvin somehow found his way here. I was about to go feed the fish in the garden, when I saw the main doors of the ground floor being pushed open, and Calvin strode in with a grim expression. He looked up, meeting my gaze, his eyes instantly sharpening as he took large strides up the stairs. His approach was aggressive, and Noella hurried downstairs to intercept him. What are you doing here? She doesn't want to see you. Upon seeing Noella, Calvin's expression softened slightly, but remained unpleasant. I'm here to take her back. Get out of my way. Noella didn't move, her tone firm. She won't want to go back with you. Calvin frowned, looking up at me, his words laced with anger. Kyra, have you forgotten about our engagement? As my fiancé, how dare you brazenly stay at the Farley residence? Where's your consideration for the Stewart and Murphy family's reputation? I couldn't help but roll my eyes. Weren't you the one constantly clamoring to break off the engagement? And weren't you the one openly pursuing Noella while still being my fiancé? How dare you try to morally blackmail me? Calvin's face darkened. The butler and security guards belatedly arrived, addressing him respectfully. Mr. Stewart, this is Mr. Farley and Miss Murphy's private residence. Please leave. Calvin seemed not to hear, still staring at me intently as he tried to continue up the stairs. The 2 security guards had no choice but to restrain him and lead him away. I spoke up. Wait. Calvin stood in the center of the hall, looking up at me with a slight smirk. Finally giving in? Come down now and leave with me. I beckoned him. Come a bit closer. Confusion flashed in his eyes, but he still took a few steps in my direction. I measured the distance and checked the height of the railing. If I jumped from this angle, I might not kill him, but I could probably half cripple him. I casually gripped the railing and lifted my foot onto it. If I landed headfirst, I should still be able to do some damage. Kyra! Noella cried out in alarm. Just as half my body was leaning out, Luther walked in from outside. In the instant I was falling, I only caught a glimpse of him pushing Calvin aside and reaching out his arms towards me. I didn't die after all. Luther acted as my human cushion. He ended up with fractured arms and a broken rib, landing him in the hospital. I only suffered minor scrapes. He had protected me so well. Looking at his pale face on the hospital bed, I felt an unprecedented guilt welling up inside me. Luther slowly opened his eyes. He had finally regained consciousness. He looked at me, his gaze as deep as the sea and inexplicably obscure. After a moment of silence, he parted his lips and spoke in a hoarse voice. "Are you all right?" My heart tightened. Fool, how could anything be wrong with me? I shook my head, poured a glass of water, and brought it to his lips. My tone softened involuntarily. "I'm fine." "But you..." Luther glanced at his arms immobilized in plaster casts. His face remained impassive as he lowered his head to take a sip from the glass. The atmosphere grew heavy once more. Luther lowered his eyelids, as if trying to conceal the emotions in his eyes. After a while, he moved his lips, smiling with a hint of self-mockery. His usually calm voice carried a trace of resignation and bitterness. "You can leave if you want to. I'll handle things with the Murphy and Stewart families. You don't need to worry about anything." His voice dropped lower. "Do whatever you want to do. Leave the rest to me. Just don't do anything to harm yourself again." It felt as if something had struck my chest, causing a dull ache. Even breathing became difficult. The initial twinge of guilt spread through my heart. I suddenly realized that my repeated suicide attempts might have been interpreted by Luther as a sign of my aversion towards him. I bit my finger, feeling utterly conflicted. How could I tell him that I didn't dislike him? I just simply wanted to die. Luther suddenly started coughing. Perhaps it aggravated the injury in his chest. As he frowned, his expression pained. I panicked, wanting to pat his back but afraid of worsening his injuries. I could only press the call button to summon the doctor. After the doctor left, I looked at his downcast eyes and said awkwardly, "Who said I wanted to harm myself? I just wanted to crush Calvin." Luther abruptly raised his head to look at me. His gaze was too intense, so I turned away embarrassed. "I won't leave for now, at least not until you've recovered." Luther's breathing became heavy. I turned back to see a satisfied smile curling at his lips. "All right," he said. During dinner, Luther looked at his arm with a slight frown. Feeling guilty, I picked up a piece of broccoli with my fork and held it to his lips. "Here." Luther seemed surprised, staring at me for a few seconds before opening his mouth to take the bite. "Tell me if you want anything specific," I said. He mumbled an in response, the tips of his ears turning pink. We had only eaten a few bites when Noella arrived. She came in carrying flowers and a bag of fruit, finally showing a bit of warmth towards Luther. "Thank you for saving my Kyra." Realizing this was a perfect opportunity to foster the relationship between the two, I quickly excused myself to the restroom, handing the food container to Noella. "Luther can't use his hands. Could you help feed him?" Luther's face immediately darkened. Noella looked at him with a cheeky smile. "Of course, leave it to me." When I returned from the restroom, the food container in Noella's hands was nearly empty. The two were gazing at each other, a sweet atmosphere filling the air between them. I felt somewhat reassured. "His appetite has improved so much since you arrived, Noella. He even finished the carrots he usually hates. You should visit him more often." Luther stiffly replied, "Who says I want her to visit?" Noella turned back, smiling sweetly. "I'll make sure to stop by every day from now on." His expression soured even further. After Noella left, Luther stood awkwardly by the toilet, his brow furrowed. Due to fractures in both arms, he would be unable to care for himself for some time. Even for something as basic as using the loo, he needed the help of a nurse. Given his germophobia, he couldn't even tolerate a simple handshake, let alone having someone touch his. Seeing Luther's frown deepen and his face turning almost purple from holding it, I reluctantly suggested, "Why don't you let the nurse help you?" Luther remained silent, struggling to undo his trousers with his plaster-encased arms. If this continued, he'd end up wetting himself. Unable to watch any longer, I offered, "What if I help?" Luther's ears turned bright red, but he didn't refuse. I turned my back, listening to the sound of running water, both of us blushing furiously. The system warned me that the affection levels between the main characters were too low. I had to find a way to bring them together. Or even if I escaped this world, the mission would be considered a failure. After much contemplation, I finally came up with an idea. Teach Noella to play Luther's mother's favorite piano piece. During her rare moments of clarity, his mother would apologize to Luther with guilt, teaching him to play the piano. If she hadn't met that man, she might have become an accomplished musician. In the original story, the female lead, dressed in a pure white dress, playing the piano under the moonlight, deeply touched the male lead's heart. At that moment, her silhouette overlapped with his mother's memory, evoking tenderness and affection from deep within him. The night before Luther was discharged from the hospital, I prepared the scene in advance: a large floor-to-ceiling window, light curtains, lush roses, and that antique piano. I gave Noella a makeover. As expected of the female lead, she looked stunning with minimal effort. At Noella's request, we sat together on the piano bench. I held her hand, guiding her to feel the rhythm of the keys. The lively, melodious music flowed from our fingertips. She looked enchanted, her eyes full of admiration. "Kyra, you play the piano so beautifully. Is there anything you can't do?" In my world, as a fake heiress, I was strictly trained from a young age. Long-term piano practice led to my tendinitis, making it difficult to even hold chopsticks at times. But my mother loved seeing me on stage. Until the real heiress returned, and every time she saw me perform, she would cry, feeling I had stolen the life that should have been hers. So, my mother never let me touch the piano again. I smiled. This was also my mother's favorite piece. "If you like it, shall I teach you?" Noella gently hugged me, resting her head on my shoulder. "Thank you, Kyra. Actually, I've wanted to thank you for a long time. When I first transferred schools, I was staying with my uncle. My aunt didn't like me, and because of my accent, I was often mocked at school. There was a lot of bullying, both obvious and subtle, but let's not dwell on that. During that time, Calvin despised me, Luther watched coldly from the sidelines. And only you saw my awkwardness and anxiety, reaching out to me. You were so beautiful, smart, and proud, almost the ideal image I had in mind. But it also made me feel too inferior to approach you. Until that day in PE class, when an unexpected period stained my trousers. I was too embarrassed to move from the wall, not knowing who to ask for help. It was you who took off your jacket and tied it around my waist, holding my hand and telling the teacher you felt dizzy from the heat and needed to rest, with me accompanying you. You, who always seemed so clean and fresh, always carrying a faint scent, didn't mind your jacket getting stained by me. From that day on, I felt like I was getting closer to my moon. Noella's tone was soft and gentle, as if the person in her memories was incredibly profound and important to her. I froze, feeling increasingly uneasy as I listened. "Noella, can I ask you a question?" If you had to choose between Calvin and Luther, who would you rather be with?" She shook her head, her cheeks slightly flushed. "Neither. Compared to those selfish, rough men, I prefer soft, sweet girls." My world crumbled even further. Trembling, I asked the system internally, "Is there any hope if the female lead has turned?" The system wore a deadpan expression. "What do you think?" The terrifying part was that I was the culprit who had turned her. How could one make such a colossal mistake? Both the system and I were on the verge of tears. In the midst of my shock, I failed to notice Luther emerging from behind a nearby shelf. His gaze didn't fall on Noella, the pure and charming girl in a white dress beside me. Instead, it landed on me. His eyes flickered, deep and inscrutable. Some emotions seemed on the verge of spilling out, barely contained. I stood up, somewhat surprised. "How come you're out of hospital early?" I couldn't help but glance at Noella beside me. "It's no use being smitten now, your future wife is only interested in me." Luther seemed to sense the threat. His lips tightened slightly. "Come upstairs with me." Realizing his tone was too harsh, he added pitifully. "My arm hurts, and so does my head. Could you massage them for me?" Since he got injured while saving me, I had to agree. "All right then." Noella's face turned sour as she huffed coldly beside us. Luther gave her a sidelong glance. I might have been imagining it, but his eyes seemed to hold a hint of triumph. Back in the room, as I was massaging Luther's temples, I suddenly heard him ask in a low voice, "Why have I never heard you play?" "Perhaps because the person I most wanted to please no longer likes to listen," I said wistfully. Luther turned to look at me, his tone growing cold. "The person you're talking about, is it Calvin Stewart?" I paused, quickly denying, "Of course not." But Luther clearly didn't believe me. His thin lips pressed together, his eyes filled with burning jealousy and a barely noticeable hint of disappointment. This piece held a special meaning for him. I explained, "It's really not him. It's my mother." Luther froze, his eyes instantly clearing. "If you'd like, I can play for you in the future." "How about that?" I stroked his handsome face, my tone unconsciously softening. He didn't speak, but turned to face me, instinctively trying to raise his hand before looking down at the cast on his arm with a frown. I secretly found it amusing. It was quite useful when playing pitiful, but now it seems to be in the way. Luther leaned towards me, our necks touching in an embrace-like position. He said, "All right." I was stunned for a moment before realizing he was answering my earlier question. "Since you've promised me, you can't go back on your word." After Luther fell asleep, I tiptoed out of the room barefoot. The system sighed, the mission might be completely failed now. "What's wrong?" Under the system's guidance, I entered Luther's study for the first time. I opened his drawer. Inside was a diary with my photo tucked in it. My name was mentioned throughout, spanning the 10+ years since we first met. Initially, he was hostile towards me, thinking I was spoiled and arrogant, capable of nothing but mindlessly chasing after Calvin. But gradually, he began to describe my appearance. When I was angry, when I smiled, when I was sad, when I was disappointed. He said that I actually cared deeply for others, just putting up a tough front. That I did feel hurt, but always pretended to be fine. That despite my words of disdain, my eyes were full of concern. He noticed his own writing starting to unconsciously overflow with affection. He even began to feel an uncontrollable jealousy towards Calvin. Hating him for his blindness. Hating himself more for being a step too late. The clear moonlight shone through the glass onto that photo, only half of which was visible. It was cut from our high school graduation photo. We stood side by side in our uniforms. I was smiling brightly at the camera, while he was gazing at me. I suddenly realized we had never taken a photo together. It turned out Luther had never had feelings for anyone but me. The system said with a worried expression, "Host, you may not be able to leave this world now. The male lead loves you deeply, while the female lead is only interested in women." I couldn't go back. But somehow, it didn't feel so bad. The soft sound of footsteps approached. I looked up to see Luther standing in the doorway, his gaze deep and unreadable. "You've seen it all," he said, his tone slightly bitter. "Do you find it disgusting, repulsive? Before, I was always afraid you'd find out, yet I also hoped you would. Now that you've actually discovered it, I seem to feel relieved. Until tonight, I was trying to convince myself to let you go, though I knew I couldn't. But in the end, I can't force you." I walked over and embraced his cold, stiff body, my lips curving into a smile. "Now, you don't have to force me anymore." Extra chapter. On the eve of my wedding, I was kidnapped. When I woke up, I found myself in a dark, enclosed ship's cabin. There was a dull ache at the back of my neck from the anesthetic. I tried to raise my hand to rub my eyes, only to discover my wrists were tied to the brass bedpost with a dark necktie. The air was heavy with the salty smell of the sea. Noella, the female lead, had also been kidnapped along with me. Her hands and feet were bound, and she was curled up in the corner, shaking her head at me with wide eyes. "You're awake." The sound of leather shoes tapping against the metal floor grew closer. I looked up in shock. It was Calvin. He wasn't wearing his glasses today. His fringe fell messily over his forehead, and the top 3 buttons of his shirt were undone, revealing a white gold diamond-encrusted cross necklace at his collarbone. That was the gift I had given him on his 18th birthday. "Earl Grey, your favorite." He brought a porcelain cup to my lips, his tone gentle. "Have you gone mad?" I held back the urge to curse at him. "Yes, I have." He smirked, casually placing the cup on a nearby cabinet. "But it's better than watching you marry Luther." At that moment, I suddenly understood why he had kidnapped me. A month ago, Luther's 3 offshore funds had precisely torn through Calvin's share price defenses, with 7 core suppliers simultaneously cutting off supply. Multiple media headlines had popped up with cancer reports, reducing the £1.2 billion patent technology to a residual value of £2 million. The acquisition price offered by the Farley Group was just enough to cover Calvin's personal debt limit, forcing him to agree to sell at a low price. The two families had been fierce rivals for years, and finally, this generation had determined the victor. Calvin had lost to Luther, the illegitimate son of the Farley family whom he had once looked down upon. "You kidnapped me to get revenge on Luther?" After reaching this conclusion, I pointed at Noella with my foot, puzzled. "Then why did you kidnap her?" "Let her go quickly." Calvin's expression was complex. "She was with you when I grabbed you. Worried about the plan going wrong, I had to bring her onto the ship as well." So, Noella had been caught up in this because of me again? Hearing this, I immediately felt guilty. "When can you let her go?" Before he could answer, Noella angrily accused. "If you let us go now, there's still time. Don't you know this is a crime? Kyra and I have been missing for so long, someone must have called the police by now." "Don't make things worse." "Well said." I mentally applauded her. Calvin stood up and walked to her side, taking a handkerchief from his jacket pocket and stuffing it into her mouth. "I know exactly what I'm doing, more clearly than any day in the past." Noella glared at him, unable to speak through her gag. I was shocked. Damn, was he always this rough with the female lead? It seems he's really gone off the deep end. A deep male voice came through the walkie-talkie at Calvin's waist. I couldn't understand it seemed to be German. He picked up the walkie-talkie and responded with a couple of sentences, then glanced at me before striding out of the cabin. Taking advantage of his absence, I twisted my wrists, trying to widen the gap and break free. Noella stared at me, her gaze anxious. After maintaining the same position for so long, both my arms had become numb from lack of blood circulation. I gritted my teeth and struggled with all my might. Just as I was about to succeed, Calvin returned. I was covered in sweat. He could easily guess what I had been trying to do, but he didn't seem to care. He calmly brought a glass of red wine to my lips, forcing me to drink. "Kyra, haven't you always liked me?" He pulled down his collar, revealing the tattoo on his chest. Where it once read N.H, it had now been replaced with 2 different letters. "This was the birthday gift you asked for when I turned 20. Calvin's parents were very much in love. His father had his mother's name tattooed on his chest. So, the year we got engaged, I asked for this gift. But the next day, Calvin had tattooed Noella's name instead. At that moment, I truly realized the unstoppable force of the plot. Besides that, I bought a small island in Phoenix. It has the world's only magnetic aurora rainbow. I've heard it's beautiful. I'm giving it to you as our wedding gift. What do you say?" Calvin placed his hand on the back of my head, gently stroking. His eyes were filled with emotions I couldn't understand. "We'll live there together from now on, just the 2 of us. We'll be very happy." His gaze was tender. "You don't like Noella. When the cruise ship passes the Lofoten Islands, I'll leave her in a fishing village there. Don't worry, she'll be safe." If my hands weren't tied, I really wanted to slap him hard to wake him up. "Calvin, I don't like you." "I haven't for a long time." I coldly shattered his fantasy. "I love Luther. If it weren't for him, I wouldn't have stayed at all." You're selfish, hypocritical, and repulsive. Come to think of it, what is there about you that's worth liking? Your love is just like you, not worth mentioning. As I uttered the last word, Calvin crushed the wine glass in his hand. The sharp glass cut into his palm, blood flowing freely. You. Before I could say anything more, he suddenly lowered his head and kissed me. His breath was hot and agitated, trying to stop my next words with his kiss. I opened my eyes wide, feeling he had gone completely mad. In my anger, I bit his tongue. Calvin winced in pain, but instead of pulling away, he pressed the back of my head and deepened the kiss. A low hum of engines came from deep within the ship, making the crystal chandelier tinkle. The walkie-talkie sounded again, the voice urgent. Calvin, his eyes bloodshot, gave me a deep look before getting up and leaving. I spat on the ground repeatedly. How disgusting! With effort, I pulled my hand out of the loosened tie and picked up a piece of broken glass to cut the zip ties binding Noella's hands and feet in the corner. Together, we ran to the cruise ship's deck. The sea wind was fierce, making it almost impossible to stand. We found an orange lifeboat covered with a waterproof canvas and struggled to pull the manual release lever. The lifeboat finally slid down the track into the sea, and the automatic inflatable buoyancy bag at the bottom immediately popped open. At the same time, Calvin and several tall, muscular German men chased after us. Don't come any closer. Noella's canvas shoes were hanging over the ship's rail, her knuckles turning white from gripping the rope so tightly. Cut the lifeboat's rope, or I'll jump. Calvin stared at her expressionlessly, unmoved. Host, the Maritime Bureau's speedboat is only 400 meters away from you. Hold on. The system's voice, which I hadn't heard in a long time, appeared in my mind again. I perked up, excitedly saying, "System. You're back." The system's tone was a bit choked up, yes. Noella swayed in the sea wind. A wave suddenly tilted the ship, and half of her body was already over the railing. Seeing that she was really about to fall, I grabbed a nearby flag rope and tied it around her waist, quickly tying a secure knot. As soon as I finished, the ship tilted again. The huge inertia threw me into the sea, and I only caught a glimpse of Noella's powerless fingers reaching out to me. The sea was colder than I imagined, salty and bitter, constantly rushing into my nose and mouth. Fear washed over me like a tidal wave. This is it. I couldn't die before, but now I'm really going to die. But what about Luther? He's still waiting for me to become his bride, his family. In that world, no one was waiting for me to come home. But in this world, I have family, love, and friends. I don't want to die. Splash! Someone jumped into the sea. It was Calvin. His white shirt spread out like a jellyfish on the inky sea surface as he swam desperately towards me. Through the swaying surface, I saw the blue and red flashing lights of a police speedboat. And the hum of a helicopter sounded overhead. The system was overjoyed. Host, the male lead and the police have arrived. Just before I was about to suffocate, Calvin grabbed me. He gripped my waist and pushed me up hard. As I gasped for precious oxygen, Calvin's head sank beneath the water. Fortunately, Luther arrived quickly. His dark, withered eyes lit up the moment he saw me. When I was pulled onto the life raft, I found Calvin's right hand bones were tightly hooked onto the speedboat's propeller guard net, while his left hand was struggling to keep my head above water. Luther wrapped me in a thermal blanket and then pulled me into his arms. He pressed his lips to my cold forehead without saying a word, but I could feel the slight trembling of his body. He had been terrified. Hold on. As the police officer was about to rescue Calvin, he suddenly let go of the guard net. He raised his lips at me, silently mouthing something, and let the seawater wash over his rolling Adam's apple. He didn't want to be saved. I frowned and leaned down to grab his collar, holding on tightly. Just when I was about to give up, the arriving frogmen saved him. Faced with Calvin's shocked and complex gaze, I coughed up some seawater and said in a hoarse voice, "What the hell are you playing at? Go rot in prison."